Well, folks, listen, you're always in for a treat when you hear that tune because it's time for another episode of the Rec Poker Podcast. But tonight, you're really in for a treat because we have a special edition of the podcast going out to a very special person. David Jones, if you're listening, this is just for you. Congratulations on your fantastic trip to Las Vegas coming up right around the corner. And from what I understand, you were very involved in the creation of our own Chris Jones, without whom this organization would not run. So we all thought we'd get together and share some tips on the forums edition of the Rec Poker Podcast for someone like David Jones, who's going to be heading to Vegas in just a few days and wants to have some fun at the poker tables. So without further ado, let's get the episode started. I want to thank the Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino, because without their support, we couldn't do what we do over here. So thank you, Running Aces. If you go to runaces.com, you can find out some fantastic information about what they've got going on. If you're not a regular listener, welcome to the Rec Poker Podcast. I'm your host, Jim Reed, Bluffsterini in the home game, and at Rec Poker Jim on Twitter. And I have the best freaking job in the world, talking poker with my friends here on the Strategy Forums edition of the podcast every Monday night while we steal each other's chips in the free nightly home game. They let me host the show on Mondays, but I am just one person. I couldn't do what I do without the gang, the group, the crew that is the wrecking crew here that makes all the magic happen here at Rec Poker. If you want to find out more about me and the other leaders of our organization, you can go to rec.poker/crew, but you can also just listen up because you're going to meet a few of them right here on the show, starting with a familiar voice, none other than the one and only Chris Jones himself.
Well, I'm Chris Jones. You can find me 5B5 on Twitter or 5x5 in the Poker Stars home game.
My name is Eric Jin, and I run the Peel, Play, Explain, and Learn every Thursdays, and I'm known as Binkley on the forums.
And my name is John Somsky, also known as Poker Geek MN Everywhere, and I run the Rec Poker home games, also known as the toughest play money home games in the multiverse.
And I'm Keith Brandt. That's Monkey System in the home game and everywhere on social media. And I run Monkeys Off Table Tools, which is a fun session every month where we crush some bots or do some drills on applications such as Range Trainer Pro, GTO Wizard, and Advanced Poker Training.
I'm Kim Kilroy. I'm Pet Vet on social platforms, Fergie56 in our home game. And I run a hand history review where we dive into our members' hand histories and we dissect them and we look at them, and that's about once a month.
And I'm Rob Washam. You can find me as Rabman50 just about everywhere. And I run a book study on the first and third Wednesdays of every month.
And I'm Taylor Moss. You can find me as @Taylor_Moss on Twitter or as Gopherboy TJM in the home game. And I also stream the home game live on Twitch on Wednesday nights. So if you want to come check out the home game action, go to twitch.tv/recpoker on Wednesday evenings.
So as you can tell, it's quite a group when we put up the bat signal and said, hey, gang, David Jones is heading to Las Vegas. Let's do something fun and give him some awesome tips. We pulled in the brain crowd. We got in a bunch of these fantastic regulars. The Wrecking Crew is a fantastic group. It's our leadership panel here. A lot of us offer coaching through the Rec Poker Shop. A lot of us just like making the poker world a better place and making ourselves available as a resource to serious and amateur recreational poker players. So it's a pleasure to be here hosting the show. Let's get right into it. So, Chris Jones, you mentioned that a fun idea would be to have this sort of personal podcast for your dad who's going down to Vegas.
Yeah.
Tell me the brief. What are we going to do?
Yeah. So my dad is going to be celebrating his 80th birthday, and he is going out to Vegas with my mom to go see U2 at the Sphere. As kind of an 80th birthday celebration. But he mentioned to me that he'd like to try a shot at playing. He's never played at a like a casino cash game. He'd like to go sit down at the table and play poker for a little while. He's not a complete amateur at this point. Like he understands the rules of poker. He's played in home games, but he's never really played in a formal card room setting with people he didn't know. And I thought it'd be really fun and maybe useful for other listeners as well. But to just give him a few sort of ideas about what he might to expect and maybe some pointers about how to approach that. And I should say his goal really is not to make as much money as possible, although that would be nice. I think the overarching goal is to sort of enjoy the experience and maybe not get knocked out on the first hand if at all possible. So there is a kind of a little bit of a last longer type interest in this as well.
And so I figured we would just all kind of share some tips for how we get the most out of the game in those kind of circumstances, and maybe also some tips for players that are playing in a poker room for the first time. It's a little different than other parts of the casino. So I'll just get started. David, first of all, just, comfort is king. You are the client here, so you should be comfortable at all times. So get there. I would say get there early, but like just get the call first and get yourself on a cash game list. That's going to be something you don't want to show up and wait. One of the questions will be, what card room do you even want to play in? There's a number of fantastic options right on the strip. I'll let the group here unmute if they would advocate for or against any particular card room. But I mean, they're all the 1-3 games. Yeah, Chris.
I'll jump in. I think he knows where they're staying at the Wynn, and so I think that's where he'll likely. And I already told him that's a really good room, so I think that's where he's thinking he'd play.
Okay, yeah, that is a good one. Get a cappuccino there. You don't get the cappuccinos in a lot of the other poker rooms on the strip, so make that one worth it. Yeah, Wynn's a fantastic room. If you're already there, that's fantastic. You can call down or just stop into the poker room to introduce yourself. Before you want to play, you'll obviously need to get a player's card. That's one of the prerequisites. And depending on what time of day, the wait list can get kind of long. And they'll usually hold your name there in order, even if you just call in. But if you're there, just pop down and introduce yourself, do it in person. Present your player's card, say, hey, I'm, David J, and I'd like to be put on the 1-3 list or the 2-5 list or whatever you're comfortable playing.
So does he just go to any poker table and say, I want to be on the list? Or is there some place specific that he might want to go to get on the list?
What a great question, Rob. There is, in fact, at the Wynn, it's really hard to miss. Once you head over to the poker area, you'll see a tournament area set up out in the main sort of interior courtyard space. But the poker room itself is just up against the wall there. And right at the entrance to that is a large standing desk where some very friendly folks will be with some computer monitors up in front. They'll be able to take your name, put you on the list, and make sure that you're well taken care of. Getting chips is also something that different rooms have different rules for. Some rooms want you to go buy your first buy-in from the cage, and then they'll handle reloads or add-ons at the table. But some places won't let you just buy your first stack at the table. I don't recall if the Wynn is one of those off the top of my head, but usually the chip counter, the cashier will be just behind the player's desk there, so that shouldn't be too difficult. What else should players know before they actually even go and sit down, folks? If it was your first time in a card room, Rob, what's on your mind?
If you're buying chips before you sit down, you don't have to buy ones when you're going to play in a 1-2 or a 1-3 game. You probably want to buy at least 100 big blinds. So at a 1-3 game, you're going to want to buy at least 300. You can probably buy up to a 500 if you want, but just get the red chip, because they'll easily make change for you for the blinds that are 1 and 3. You don't want to drag a whole bunch of $1 chips over to a 1-3 game. And I think people don't understand that because they think 1-3, well, I need some 1 and 3 chips, or I need some, you really don't. Just bring the 5s, and the dealer can handle all the change that you need as you're putting in your blinds.
And they'll tell you when you get on the list, oh, you'll be about 20 minutes or you'll be about an hour, or oh, there's a seat available right now. Don't feel like you need to go buy those chips and hold on to them for an hour either, because that'll be annoying. But when they call your name, just it's usually a good idea to go stop and pick up some chips on your way to the table so that you don't have to go back. Taylor?
Yeah, question for the group. I don't play much cash, but as I think about this, I would think, the table that I'm playing at would be really important to me. Not, the height of it, but like the people at the table. Like if I go to a table and like I don't like, the people there, no one's talking, it's an unfriendly environment, like can I switch tables, or what does that procedure potentially look like?
Yeah, great question. You absolutely can. And I think table selection is really important. Like we said at the top of the show, it's about your comfort in enjoying the experience. So it couldn't be easier. You just tell the dealer, I'd like a seat change button, usually is how they'll handle it. Some places will have you ask a floor person for a table change token. And then as a spot becomes available, they'll usually announce and give you the option to take that spot. Eric, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, so that does vary room by room. Some places have a main table and then a must-move table that feeds that. So by main table, they want to keep one table that's constantly full, and then the must-move table, if you're seated there, if they have a seat open at the main table, they'll ask somebody to move from the must move table to there. So a lot of times people will volunteer, but if nobody volunteers, then it's some random selection to move you.
And
So
I
it
would
does
say,
vary.
just ask. Don't feel uncomfortable asking. And especially in a situation like this, you're not like giving up a lot of information to your opponents about how experienced you are. Every room has different rules. But just don't be uncomfortable. Just don't like put up with it. If you feel like I'd like to move to another table or another seat, just ask. They'll make it easy.
And it's okay that to be nervous, or it's a new experience. It's intimidating. It's intimidating for everybody the first time you go to a casino to play, and it just takes a while to get comfortable with it, and that's fine.
Yeah, and I mean my recommend, I don't know what others think of this, but my recommendation is for my dad or anyone in this situation is there, you might have a sort of a feeling like I don't want to stick out like the newbie. I don't want to like look like I don't know what I'm doing, but you're gonna, no matter what you try to do. So I would almost just lean into it. Like just enjoy the experience. Just show up and ask the dealer questions if you don't know what's happening, if you don't know, if you don't understand why something's going on, you can always ask the dealer. You can always ask the floor people who show you where the table are for sort of guidance and recommendations. And it's not going to be that big of a deal that people, and I mean, just say like, I'm celebrating my 80th birthday and I'm playing poker and I'm having fun, and like that's
guess
just
what?
fine.
Poker players are suspicious. If the more you say it, the more they're gonna go, this guy is right, trying to fool me, trying to trick
what
me.
angles this guy working?
Yeah,
we got this pro in here pretending he's just playing around on his birthday. I've seen that trick before.
Sounds like one of my tricks. I
Yeah.
do that all the time.
Yeah, that's right. And I will say, especially knowing that you're going to be at the Wynn, like that's a very pro place. Like the dealers there are excellent. They're going to take great care of you. No one, so ask for it. Just ask. If you're ever unsure about anything, ask. And that's going to be the best piece of advice. Because like I said, you're the customer here. So get what you want and have a good time and lean into it. What about buying in? So we talked about buying in advance. Usually like $100 or 100 big blinds is the default buy-in for a cash game. But given your interest in sort of just like having a good time and soaking up the experience, this could be one of those rare instances where you could buy in short, buy in for 50 big blinds instead. And then that just limits the amount that you can lose on any given hand. And you can always add chips onto the table when you sit down, but you can't take them off and put them in your pocket. So even let's just say for the sake of argument, it's a 1-3 table. So 100 big blinds would be $300. You can even at the cage buy $300 worth of chips put 150 in your pocket and put 150 on the table. Then you've got 50 big blinds on the table and you've got 50 in your pocket if you want to reload or anything like that. Given what you're trying to achieve from this session, doubling up probably won't feel as good as busting hurts. So I think maybe having less behind might actually help you enjoy the experience more and be a little less stressed out about losing a buy-in. Keith, did you have something on that or a different subject?
Yeah, something that's sort of related is what are the procedures with straddles? And the reason it's related is because if you buy in for 50 big blinds and there's a straddle, now you're down to 25 big blinds.
Yeah.
So what are the usual procedures for a straddle?
Should probably define straddle.
Yeah, great.
I was going to say we'll need to define that if we were going to talk about it.
Yeah,
and it's one of those things that, again, like it's a custom at the table. And okay, so let's just jump in. So a straddle, usually what happens is there's the dealer button, there's the small blind to their left, and the big blind to their left. The straddle is essentially a third blind. It usually varies in amount between like 2 to 5 times the big blind. There might be, I don't remember exactly what it does at the win. I think they only let you straddle under the gun at the win,
which is true,
which is good and simplifies things. Some players at a table will just decide that they're going to run a straddle game, in which case it's sort of understood that everyone is going to straddle. You don't have to, David, and nor does anyone else who plays at that table. And don't feel like you have to just go along to be, one of the players. If you don't want to straddle, don't straddle. And if anyone gives you any attitude about it, they won't after someone talks to them. So don't worry about that at all. And basically, that's a good point from Keith, though, because it does make your effective stack even smaller. So it changes. You can't play as many even speculative hands that you could with a 50 big blind stack now that you've been reduced down to an even smaller effective stack. But okay, so show up, get a player's card, find out where you get your first chips, figure out how much you want to buy in for, and sort of get comfortable at the table, get used to the mechanics of the blinds coming around, look to your right and your left. Hopefully it's a fun table and people are having a good time. And then, that one point, you cannot take money off the table. So it's really important that you only have as much in your stack as you're comfortable with from the start. Because once it's on there, it's fair game. John Somsky, you unmuted for a second.
I was just going to say, I think the important thing is just to make sure you are comfortable playing at the game. What I would do if I were you, I like the 50 big blind buy-in, just limits your loss. But pretend as soon as it's on the table, pretend you've lost it. Because then you can play without worrying about it. That's money you've spent. If you get anything back from that, that's a bonus. Because what you don't want to do is call lots of rounds of betting, and then when it gets to the river, fold before you ever have a chance to win anything. Now I'm not saying being a calling station, don't just blindly call, but you can't be intimidated. If you think you've got the best hand, you've got to be willing to put the chips into the middle of the pot. And if you buy in for less, you will be more likely to be willing to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Keep in mind, though, that people, if they sense that you are timid, if they're putting chips in the pot, that probably means they have a really good hand if they are picking up on how you're playing. So just enjoy it.
Yeah.
Let's talk about mechanics a little bit, because we're talking about putting chips in the pot. It's very important that you do not do what is called a string bet. So let's say you want to bet $15 and you take a $5 chip and put it out there and then try to put $10 more out there is illegal. You cannot do that. The minute you put chips in the pot, that's your bet, unless you announce what your bet is. So once you announce what your bet is or what your intention is to either bet or raise, then you're free to do it however you like. So keep in mind that a lot of people get stuck on this because, you know, they're used to their home games where they throw the money in the middle of the pot. That's another thing. Don't throw the money in the middle of the pot. Put it right in front of you as your bet. You don't want to throw it in the pot. You don't want to splash the pot because then people can't tell how much money you actually put in the pot. In home games, you know, nobody cares. You're just throwing chips around, and string bets are common. Everybody does it. It's not quite as loose in a casino when it comes to handling your chips and putting them out as a bet or a raise.
And different rooms have different rules for what constitutes actually finishing the bet. Some have a betting line. So once you put your chips across that betting line, it becomes the bet. Some casinos don't have a betting line, but significant forward motion considers that. If there's any ambiguity or uncertainty, ask, you know, what's the rules here?
Yeah.
And then there's the one that got me is that one chip equals a call. So if somebody bets $5, but you want to raise it up to 25 and you put a $25 chip in, that's considered a call.
Unless you tell them,
unless you say raise, right?
you have to say raise before the chip hits the table.
Mm-hmm. And let's just be real clear about that one, because I see people make this mistake a lot. If the bet's $5 and you put 2 red chips in, you've raised it to $10. If you put 5 red chips in, you've raised it to $25. If you put 1 green chip in, you've called.
Yeah, a green chip is $25.
Oh, a green chip, which is $25. Yes. Then you've called. And this, in the long run, speeds up the game, because just putting 1 chip in of any denomination is a call. If you put a red chip, anyway, yeah. So multiple chips are a way of raising, but just to make it easy, just verbalize. And David, you're not going to be playing that many hands, so don't worry about like, oh, are people going to tell that I'm like comfortable or uncomfortable when my voice cracks because I'm saying call or raise or something. Don't even worry about that. Just disambiguate the situation and just verbalize what you want to do, call or raise, and that'll take some of the pressure off there. Rob?
And don't worry about making change before you make your bet. For instance, if you want to bet $12 and all you have in front of you are $5 chips, you just put the 3 $5 chips in as you say, I bet 12, or say 12 and put the 3 $5 chips in. The dealer will make change at the end of the hand or at the end of that round. So don't worry about having the exact change. As long as you announce how much you want to bet, you can put any amount of chips out there that covers that amount, and the dealer will make change for you as he goes.
Eric, you want to jump back in there? Yeah.
Yeah. What makes it easy is keep your chips orderly. There's stacks of 20 is standard. So a stack of $25 chips is $100. So that's easy to tell. The rule is if you have big chips, so the $25, $100 chips, you need to keep those visible. So either on top of your stack or in front, or in the very front of your chip stack.
Good one. Keith?
Another important thing, especially if you're in one of the seats that sits next to the dealer, is to protect your hand. Either put a chip on it or put your own fingers on it, or some kind of card protector, because the dealer might reach over and grab your cards when you wanted to keep them. But if you protect your hand, that won't happen. And then another thing that's pretty rare but might happen is if somebody they muck wrong and they throw their cards on top of your cards, now your cards are probably dead too, and you'll prevent that by protecting your hand.
Yeah, David, you might not have a snazzy rec poker shot glass like this to use as a card protector, but that's okay if you don't. That's okay. One thing that I like to do is I just use a $1 chip. I use that as my card protector, and when I win the hand, I do not release my hand until they have shoved that pot towards me entirely. And then once they have, I just slide my 2 cards over to the dealer with the $1 chip on top. That's their tip. my hands protected, nice and smooth. And like the guys are saying there, just it is on you to protect your hand, and especially if you're in the 1 or the 9 seat, it is easy for the dealer to mistake your hand for mugged cards or for other people to foul your hand. That definitely is something that happens.
Yeah,
Kim?
not only protecting your hand physically, but also make sure you understand completely what the action is. So make sure you don't accidentally expose your hand thinking somebody said call, or make sure you have confirmation from the dealer that, yeah, it's your turn to expose your hand.
And that
So I
brings
had
up.
a quick,
Oh, go ahead, Kim.
sorry, I just had a quick tip about cards since we're on the topic of looking at. When you look at your cards, look at them deftly so that nobody else can see your cards, and don't lift them off the table. You have to keep your cards on the table when you look at them, and just try and look at them so that nobody else around you can see your cards. And then the other thing too that I find sometimes with beginners is they don't act in turn. So just make sure that you wait until it's your turn to act, and make sure you're watching the action so that you know when it's your turn to act, and people don't have to keep reminding you that it's your turn.
And that was going to be the thing that I was going to kind of add on to that. I think one of the key person at the table is the dealer. The dealer controls the game. They run the game. If they're a good dealer, and at the win, they're often very good dealers, they will be looking directly at the person whose decision it is to make. So you can, and if you ever have a question, before you make an action, before you try to do something, you can always ask the dealer about whose turn is it? Is it on me? Whose decision is? Because sometimes some people will sit there for a very long time before they make a decision. You might be thinking, oh, I guess I must be on me because no one else is doing anything. That could just be somebody thinking for a very long time. So the dealer will always tell you, and it's not like a bad thing to ask them.
Yeah, great point. And again, just look at the dealer. The dealer is going to be communicating with their eyes a lot, trying to move the game along. So if they're looking at you, it's probably your turn. But you can always just ask. And again, don't be embarrassed to ask. Just say, oh, whose action is it? It happens to the best of us. And I act out of turn every once in a while, and I sure feel stupid about it, but then I move on to the next hand. Kim has been involved in hands where I've acted out of turn before. People love it. It's great. No, try and avoid it, but it's not the end of the world necessarily.
And speaking of not acting out of turn, one thing that I will just say, like, that maybe Dad, I've never seen you play in a home game, so I don't know if this is a kind of thing that might come up, but probably not. But one of I think the cardinal sins in a card room, the one that might get you in the most in trouble, is if in the middle of a hand is going on. Let's say you folded 3-9 offsuit, and the flop comes 9-9-3, and you say, oh man, I folded a full house, or something, just something like that. Do not give away the contents of your hand, even if you're not in a hand, until all action is over and the pot has been pushed to somebody. You can say it then if you want. Don't really need to, but you can. But if you do it, I wouldn't either. But if you feel like you really need to, like that's the time to do it. Until that pot has been shoved to somebody, that is probably the biggest sin you could make in a card room.
Yeah, and also just cross-talking while other people are in the hand. It's okay to have a quiet conversation with your neighbor. But if the player to your left is involved and the player to your right is involved, you should probably just sort of give them some quiet time and not really get yourself involved in the hand if you're not playing in the hand. Try not to cross-talk and get in their way while they're playing. But yeah, I don't think that'll be a problem. Keith, you had something then, Rob, I think.
Yeah, I wanted to piggyback on what Kim talked about earlier about how to look at your hand and how to shield it. The best technique is to have the cards horizontal in front of you and peel them up off the table with your left thumb, and you're looking at them sideways. That way you don't have to bring them up as high as you do if you did it with your right thumb, and you'll have a less chance of accidentally showing your hand to the guy next to you.
I actually do, maybe a couple other folks can chime in with their hand peeking techniques. I do a cover with my left hand. I kind of bring them in diagonally under that cover, and then I use my right thumb to peel the top corner of each of them and put them down. So my hands kind of look like this when I'm looking at my cards, and that makes it really hard for people to see underneath. But as long as you're not like picking them up and waving them around, you're probably in good shape. Rob?
I was going to agree with Keith there. And also I was going to say, based on what we talked about just a minute ago, nobody cares what you folded.
It's true.
So if you want to be considered a seasoned professional, or at least a seasoned recreational player that is not making mistakes, don't whisper to your neighbor, folded 6-3.
That's right. Because everyone else will know what you're whispering about. That is the other thing. John, then Eric. John, then Eric.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that what I find easiest for protecting your cards is just get a really big stack of chips, and you can hold it right next to that, and that kind of protects the view from them. So
Good thinking.
just win a lot. It makes it a lot easier.
It does make a lot of things easier. Eric?
Yeah, so sometimes you'll be sitting next to some guy who likes to be friendly, I guess, and wants to tell you what cards they have or show it to you before they folded. That puts you under no obligation to do the same thing.
True.
Don't feel like, oh, well, he showed me, I have to know. You didn't ask for it. You have no obligation to do the same thing.
Speaking of which, the players to your left and your right are going to be involved in your blinds a lot. And some rooms will allow you to chop in that scenario, and some will not. What it basically means is if it folds around to the small blind, often what you and the big blind can do is just decide to just take your chips back, muck your cards, and start the next hand. You kind of chop the pot. You get your small blind back, they get their big blind back. And what this does is it stops the casino from taking a rake on that hand, because they only rake when it goes to flop, so that's good. And it also speeds the game up because everyone doesn't have to wait while two players with very wide ranges check down to the river in a super small pot that's not very exciting. So there's an etiquette to this, though. You don't look at your cards, see that you have a bad hand, and then decide, actually, you'd like to chop the blinds this time. Usually, players will say, oh, I always chop, or I never chop. And it's just sort of something that you agree to do before you look at your cards. And just, it'll be something that comes up, and you should get on the same page with the player to your left when they're your big blind, and the player to the right, to your right, when they're your small blind. The only time someone might not do this is if there is a jackpot promotion or a high hand promotion or a bad beat promotion at the venue. I don't know if the Wynn has one, but let's just talk about it anyway, just briefly. If the casino is going to pay out a high hand bonus, if like someone gets quads, or if someone gets a straight flush, or they're going to pay a bad beat if someone loses with a straight flush or something like that, players might not want to chop if they have a hand like 7-8 of diamonds or pocket fours, because you can tell on the flop, there's a very good chance if you're going to make a straight flush or quads or a really big hand like that. But if you can't say to the person sitting next to you, hey, I think I might make the high hand. Let's just see a flop and see what happens. Because then the casino will very correctly not pay you out for that promotion, because you're not allowed to conspire like that. So here's how we conspire instead. We kind of speak about that without actually saying words like bad beat or jackpot or quads or anything like that. There's a common slang in the poker world, the word cheeseburger. If you say, oh, I'm kind of hungry, I could go for a cheeseburger right now. If you just say the word cheeseburger in common language, the other person in the hand will probably understand what you're saying, and they will just check it down. You know, you call the small blind, they check, you just check the flop, check the turn, check the river. Oh, I guess we didn't make a hand, blah, 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 split the pot that way. So yeah, I don't know if this is going to happen at the Wynn or not. I don't know if they have a bonus at the Wynn, but I don't think they do. But just in case you're playing somewhere else or someone else is listening, maybe you're hungry for a hamburger. People get hungry for a hamburger every once in a while. Taylor, you had something there?
Yeah, you learn something new every day. I had no idea about the cheeseburger.
Cheeseburger.
I have never heard that anywhere ever. So
That's not a Canadian thing. That's not a Jim Reedism. That's a
I've
real
never heard
thing.
it either.
See, it's not.
I
just
think
me
I heard
too.
it before, but I think I heard it
Never
from
heard
Jim.
it.
Doesn't count. Okay.
I think it might
We
be
can move
something
on.
Jim's just invented.
We can move on from this then.
Jeez. Hey, if
Uh,
anyone else is listening, I want to know if you have heard cheeseburger as a slang for I don't want to chop the blinds because I have a strong hand. Tweet us at Rec Poker or email Jim at Rec Poker. I need validation so I can lord it over all these fools when I tell them later that someone else knows that the cheeseburger thing is in fact a thing. Thank you very much. John, what's up with you?
Oh, I was just gonna mention, if you wanna do the hand promotion thing, talk about it beforehand. Just say,
Right.
if there's a chance to do it, not during any specific hand, between hands, you can discuss what your strategy is going to be. And then they will understand when you make your cheeseburger comment, I guess,
Yeah,
maybe.
which is definitely a real thing. But don't put the dealer in a tough spot because the dealer's job is to sort of spot the people that are not acting in good faith. And so if you're like, okay, so next time if I have a good hand, I'll say cheeseburger. Like just try and just do that a little off to the side so that you don't put the dealer in an uncomfortable position because they're kind of they're in charge of that sort of thing while they're there, even though they don't really, it's not their money, they don't care. But you could put them in a tough spot with management. Taylor?
So question for you in terms of how stuff goes. You said you can't take chips off the table. However, I'm up $300 for the night. I'm ready to be done. What do I do now? Do I just grab the chips and leave? Yes.
Basically, yeah. And you probably want to ask for a rack because it's going to make it easier for you to carry all those chips back to the cashier desk because that's where you're going to get paid. And it might not be at the same cashier desk where you bought your chips, although at the Wynn it is. So that's not an issue. The one cardinal rule is once you've got your rack and you've put your chips into the rack, listen, you're allowed to keep playing, but it is proven to be bad luck to play out of the rack before you leave. It's a silly superstition, but it's one of those ones that anecdotally just seems to be true a lot more than it's not true. So I always wait. You know me, I'm a life nit. I want to play every position that I've paid for. So I'll play through the button late position all the way until my next hand would be the big blind. And that's when I leave. And I just don't pay the blinds until I've on my last hand. I just play all the free spots that I have, chip up, put those chips in a rack and walk off to go tell everyone about how much fun I had there. Chris and then John.
Well, I was going to get us, I think this has been really good in terms of the mechanics of the game and the setup and kind of how we bet and that kind of thing. But maybe we could spend I don't want to go because obviously poker strategy is immense and vast and deep, but to somebody like this, if they're showing up with a 50 big blind stack or 100 big blind stack, which would be $150 or $300 stack, what kinds of really top pieces of strategy would you consider for this player as they approach this table?
Well, I'll jump in, and then everyone else, please feel free to unmute and add your 2 cents. Fold a lot. You really don't want to play a lot of hands, particularly in the blinds and early position. So I guess one piece of advice would be don't get attached to your blinds. You put those blinds in, they came out of your stack, but they are no longer yours. They belong to the table now. So just because you paid a big blind or a small blind, you're not really getting a discount to continue playing in the hand. If you don't have a good hand, just fold and kiss that $3 goodbye. Everyone else pays it in the orbit. It's not coming out of your pocket any more than anyone else's. The late position spots are where you want to play your hands. So the button, the cutoff, the hijack, those 3 are really where you're going to make most of your plays. And I typically would say you want to be opening hands and 3-betting hands and not limping and calling. Given your circumstance, David, I would still say don't limp. If you're going to open a hand, open a hand. And by which I mean, if it folds to you, raise. Don't just call the big blind amount, raise. And then I would counsel a lot of players not to call in position that much, to 3-bet instead, to re-raise when someone opens in front. But playing off a short stack and just wanting to kind of have fun at the table, I actually don't think it's a hanging offense if you want to just call with one of the hands that we're going to talk about a little later in the show when we talk about hand selection. And the only reason not to do that would be if you notice that the players to your left were being extremely active and aggressive and raising a lot. I don't think it's actually the end of the world to just call and see a flop in position, given your circumstances and your goals here. John, did you have some tips for David?
Yeah, I think the thing you really want to avoid, if at all possible, is to stay away from good second best hands. And in No Limit Hold'em, it's really easy to get stack committed and to get all of your chips into the pot. So that goes back to what Jim was saying, play strong hands. You don't want to be playing hands like King 9 and think when the flop comes 9, 8, deuce, you have a great hand, because you don't. Ace 9 is more likely to have played the hand than a King 9 is. And there's all sorts of other problems with those. So just try to stick to your stronger hands. If you're going to play, try to bet more often. That way there's two ways to win the pot. Everyone can fold to you, or you can take it down, and just stick to the strong starting hands.
Rob?
No.
I was gonna,
Oh, sorry, Kim. Yeah, Kim, jump in, please.
I was just gonna say, when you're raising, like, just raise an appropriate amount. I don't know if we want to get into the discussion of that, but if we've got, say, 3 people before you that just call, then you don't want to make a raise of just 3 times. You want to make a raise of more like 6 or 7 times the bet.
Yeah, and I think you'll see that play out on the table as you go. What kind of the bet sizes are and what the raise sizes are. You'll kind of see what people are doing, and it'll become kind of a standard. But what I was going to say is, don't get married to a hand. You could have pocket aces, and if the board runs out with 4 diamonds and your aces are black, chances are you're losing. And one of the things that I always like to say, and people give me grief for, is if they're betting on the river, they always have it. So make sure that you have a very decent hand before you call a big bet on the river. 1 pair hand is usually not enough. So don't get married to a nice big hand. It looks so good, but it could definitely be way behind somebody that's betting big on the river. So keep that in mind. There's no shame in folding. And when you fold, nobody sees the cards you're folding. So they don't know if you're folding, a full house or folding a deuce 3 that didn't hit anything. So don't worry about that.
And this, oh, sorry, Chris. Yeah.
Well, and Jim, you kind of touched on this, but I think in terms of like which positions we play from, but the thing that people might be aware of when they first approach a table like this, but we've talked about it in other shows. But sort of one of the fundamental #1 things to understand about poker strategy is that the most important thing, maybe more important than the cards you hold in your hand, is the position you have at the table. And if you get to act last, you have a huge informational advantage. So putting yourself into that spot as much as you can is really advantageous. That's why when you're looking at hands to open, you might open a little bit wider, even though I think we would still recommend for you to sort of like keep it solid, keep it tight, keep it like really top hands. But when you're on the button, you have the best position at the table, and that's a type of spot where you might want to open that up just a little bit more, and you want to play extraordinarily tight when you're the first player to act. Like that's like a type of spot where you're really only opening the super premium hands.
And I think I want to give David a sort of a sense of how few hands good poker players even play. Like most of the time we're folding. Like more than half the time we're folding. And I might even say, a lot, some of the hands that pros and experienced players play, they're not even much more valuable than just folding. Like you can just get a bit of value out of them. And so we open them and we play them. But if you're just sitting down for a session to have fun, over folding is actually your friend. You're not giving up that much, and you're avoiding spots where you might find yourself out of your depth post flop, making expensive decisions and potentially expensive mistakes. So buying in short is going to be one way to help you in that regard. And then just having a very strong starting range of hands is the other way. And I'd love for the gang to weigh in here, but I might say something like, only play hands if it's a pocket pair, or if both cards are a jack or higher, would be a great way to kind of stay out of trouble. I'd love to know what other people think is like a good way to sort of tell a less experienced player what kind of hands to play. I don't see.
I might,
anyone.
I mean,
Kim?
and especially in those earlier positions, I might even play, like, I wouldn't play all the pairs.
Right.
Probably if I'm in the first position at the table and I'm trying to coach somebody like this, I think I'd open nines plus, and like I'd want an ace in my hand otherwise, like an ace king, ace queen kind of holding. Well, I don't know what others think.
Yeah, I meant
Yeah.
more in late position even.
Yeah.
Yeah, early position, you're going to be even tighter. Keith, did you have something?
Yeah, I was gonna say in that early position, like the under the gun position, your king queen offsuit isn't even good enough.
Yeah.
It's pretty,
Yeah.
but it's not good enough.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
I think in the earliest spots, like ace queen and then pocket nines is a good spot. And then as you move around the table, from second position, add in eights, go down to
Yep.
ace jack, and you can keep on loosening up. And then once you get back like on the button, then I think pretty much you can play most of your pink cards, Broadway cards. So that's 10 or higher. If you have 2 cards in your hand, 10 or higher on the button, you can play those, and probably any pocket pair. But again, that's assuming that there hasn't been any significant action in the pot. If someone in early position raised big and then re-raised, just because you're on the button doesn't mean you should be playing pocket deuces or pocket fives. Just
Yeah.
throw them away right away.
Great point, that if someone raises in front of you and then someone else re-raises them, you should probably ditch most of your holdings, unless in your case, like unless you got aces or kings. I would probably just let that one go and let them fight it out and wait for another spot. Kim, you unmuted next.
Yeah, the way that I often approach a cash table, especially if it's one of these really sort of passive loose cash tables where everybody's wanting to see flops and there's a lot of limping, or there's a raise and a lot of calling of the raise. So somebody's already opened the hand and you're looking at your hand and you're deciding if you want to play it or not. I decide based on, can my hand make the best hand possible? So that would be suited aces and high cards that are suited and pairs, and just not play like 7-8 suited and 9-10 suited, because somebody can easily get a flush that's better than yours. So, but the ace high suited cards, you can get the best flush there and beat other people at the table.
I was just
I
gonna
love it.
say, I remember my first time playing live poker. It was at Canterbury, so it was a limit game. But I remember my range was like, no matter what position I was in, because I wasn't positionally aware then, I would play jacks, queens, kings, aces, ace king, ace queen, and that's about it. So, I mean, and there's nothing wrong with doing that when you're first playing, because you're going to find yourself in very comfortable positions later in the hand. You're not going to have as many awkward decisions to make if you're playing a very, very strong range. Now, obviously, if you want to have fun, people are limping, throw in some of the other pairs. Maybe you can hit a set. That'll be a lot of fun. But if you want to just make sure that you don't have tough decisions later in the hand, play a very tight range.
Keith?
Yeah, I was gonna add that the button is a special position as far as your starting hands. If it folds around to you on the button, you just depends on your big blind player, especially if he defends his blinds a lot. But you could play. There's a lot of hands you can play. All the aces, I think, all the ace combos you can play, all the pairs, all the broadways. And you can even start with some of those suited connectors if you want, because you're going to be in position. You know you're going to be in position, and a lot of times you'll just get to steal the blind. But even if he calls, you'll have position, and it's a lot easier to play. You'll know if you made a hand. You'll know what he did. Unless he donks, then that's kind of hard.
Yeah, that's true too.
But
and
What's a donk?
I was just gonna say, like, there's no way to, that means that, yeah, we probably might
Yeah,
be too
that's
much,
a
but
good point. Good point. Good point. And I would say, you probably know this already, David, but you see in like movies where people they bet everything in their chip stack, and then someone else comes and they're like, "Oh yeah, well I bet all that and my watch, and what are you gonna do now?" And then in the movies, it like puts the other person in this terrible position because they're like, "Oh well, what am I going to have to put up to like meet this guy's watch?" That's total BS. That's not how it actually works. If you have the short stack, you're actually in charge. You are what's referred to as the effective stack, and no one can make you put in $1 more than the chips that you have at the table there. So if you've got $100 left and you go all in, and everyone else at the table has $200 or $300 or more, they're not going to force you out of the hand. They can't like make you fold. You just hold on to those cards, because what the dealer is just going to do is set up a side pot where the people with more chips, they're playing for that extra money, but your short stack is what everyone else has to match to play in that hand. So I'm not explaining that very well, but ultimately being a short stack does not mean that they can push you around. In fact, it almost gives you some power to decide when to pull the trigger on that all-in hand that can put them to some very difficult positions. What else, gang? I guess trust your gut would be one. If you're post flop and there's 3 or 4 people in the hand, and some guy bets and then the next person raises and the next person raises after that, even if you have a pretty good hand, just don't be afraid to fold. Overfolding is probably your friend when it comes to a lot of these spots. And if it feels a little sticky or something weird's going on, trust your gut and listen to it and take the appropriate action. Rob, and then Chris again.
Don't be afraid to go all in with aces or kings.
Yeah.
If there's a lot of action, I mean, you don't have to open jam like you're the first to act and just jam. Don't do that. But when you raise and someone re-raises you, don't be afraid to put that 50 big blinds in the middle with your aces or kings. I mean, that's a great play. That's you want that. You want someone to call you when you have aces or kings, and you want to get all your chips in the middle before the flop.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why we've got fewer why we bought in a little short. Like, it makes it easier to feel good about shoving like that. Yeah. Chris?
yeah, I mean, the last thing, I think this has been really good conversation about the mechanics and the strategy. And then the last thing I would say, that you're doing this, I know you're doing this to really just to try it out, to experience it, to enjoy it. So be sure you're doing that. Be sure you're not just like thinking nervously about, am I doing this? Am I doing the right thing? Is everyone looking at me weird? Do I remember what I'm supposed to be doing? Am I looking at the dealer? Just like, you have to do some of that and you'll have to pay attention, but like, most of all, like, experience this, live in it, talk to the people at your table. They'll probably be, if it's any kind of normal Vegas cash table, there'll probably be 6 or 7 really kind of awesome, nice, talkative, engaging, interesting people, and there'll probably be 1 or 2 absolute like miserable human beings. And don't let those miserable human beings sort of like bring down your experience. Focus on the other things that are going on. Most poker players are kind of wonderfully engaging people, and there's a few kind of other ones out there, and they just are kind of rotten in their souls, and that's okay. And you don't need to let them bring you down.
Yeah, very true. Very true. And if you happen to get seated and there's a bunch of just miserable rags all around you sharing their misery with the world, just ask for that table change. And nothing could be easier. And then you can leave those bunch of jerks behind and go have some fun at another table. So well said, Chris. And David, I hope you have a fantastic time. Any other parting words of advice for our I was going to call him our correspondent, but he's actually not really our correspondent in this case. He's just
Well, I got one. I just, happy birthday, Dad. I love you very much. Happy 80th. Enjoy this the best. And I hope this was helpful in terms of like getting you a little bit of a taste of like trying to do this for the first time.
And happy birthday, David. I really envy you the chance to see U2 at the Sphere, because U2 is one of my favorite bands. I saw them like 20 years ago, and they are fantastic. And I've seen some shots of what it's like in the Sphere, and it looks totally awesome. So I'm really envious that you're getting to go and see YouTube at the Sphere. Have fun.
Happy birthday.
Eric. Yeah,
Just wanna
happy
wish
birthday.
you happy birthday.
Happy birthday, David. And also congratulations, I guess. And thank you for all the hard work that you and Mrs. Jones did to create little Chris here, who has just blossomed into a delightful young man. And we're all very pleased to have him here on the team. And we couldn't do what we do here at Rec Poker without our own Chris Jones. So to Papa Jones, happy birthday to you, sir. And have a freaking fantastic time in Las Vegas. So thank you to David Jones and his progeny. Thank you to the Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino. Chris, Kim, Eric, John, Rob, Keith, and Taylor, thanks for all your input. And thanks for you listening along at home. We'll see you again sometime soon on the Rec Poker Podcast.